Welcome back, everyone, and greetings to all those who are just joining us for day two of this Global Cloud Native and Open Source Summit. Right on time, actually, as we jump right into our first panel discussion of the event day. And for this session, I'll be calling on Mr. Sujit Christie, who is the president of the IC Square Colombo chapter, to moderate this panel discussion continuation of Lawrence's earlier topic, intersection of apps and cloud security. So just a brief on our moderator, Sujit. He is a governance, risk, and compliance professional, very passionate cybersecurity adoption evangelist, providing vital guidance to improve the cyber defenses whilst raising cybersecurity awareness to improve risk reduction and compliance. He currently serves as the CISO and cybersecurity advisor in several organizations and is a director with the Layer 7 Seguro Consultoria Private Limited. And of course, as I mentioned just a moment ago, he's the president of the IC Square Colombo chapter. And we're very glad to have him here on the panel today. Should you have any other questions for the panelists as well that will be joining him, do drop your questions in the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen. Questions are very much welcome and they'll be answered either during the discussion or perhaps towards the end during the Q&A session. So over to you, Sujit, to help us introduce the rest of the panelists and move on with the discussion.
Thank you, Bede. Very good morning to everyone. I have with me very experienced, eminent speakers. First and foremost, the first person I'd like to introduce is Lawrence. You heard him in the previous session where he presented on the same topic, intersection of apps and cloud security. Then we also have with us Mohammed Abdul Kalam Azad, Head of Information Security, Eastern Bank Limited. And then you also have Raja Selvaraja, Senior Principal, Cybersecurity Consultant, Cloud and Container, Standard Chart Bank Limited. And again, I'd like to say Lawrence Cowder, Head of Solutions Engineering, APJ Snake, right? So that's the panel. And lots of experience. All of them come from diverse background, diverse industries. Several years of experience working in different aspects in IT and business. So I guess they're well equipped and knowledgeable to talk about these subjects. So for me, the interesting part of this topic is innovation precedes security, right? What that means is security always follows innovation, and innovation sometimes is attempted to disrupt markets or disrupt businesses. We also look at people, process, and technology. The easiest part to manage, I would say, is technology. The second hardest would be the processes because it is depend on people, and people are the most challenging piece in this jigsaw. So we are also seeing lots of cloud adoptions. Some of them are hybrid. In some cases, it's multi-cloud. So when we look at the cloud adoption, people look at different ways of addressing their needs. One, lift and shift, so they just migrate all their workloads to the cloud. Some of them are cloud native. So in a hybrid environment, you can also have hybrid workloads, which probably have been shifted from your physical data center to the cloud environment. And typically, they may not be cloud ready. So when you look at all these aspects, we see that the security is following everything as expected. Then we also heard when Lawrence was presenting that speed to market, and the developers want to write faster code. The other aspect, right, while they write code as fast as what is required to meet market needs or business requirements, on the other hand, the security teams also want to fix bugs, and usually seen as people who put the speed breakers or slow down processes, right? So when if you are actually having a conversation with the marketing team, the app development, and the security, and all of them sometimes, or most of the time, would start pointing fingers saying, okay, we are not able to achieve business goals because security is hindering the rollout, right? And on the other hand, like I mean, we have two gentlemen from the banking industry, which is the most regulated industry. So the regulators also insist on compliance, right? Minimize the exposure, minimize the risk. So given this background, I'd like to share with you a statistics which I recently saw in one of the uh, surveys, where they're saying from February 2015 to June 2019, there were about 216 software supply chain attacks recorded. And then from July 2019 to 2020 May, the number of attacks increased to 929. So you can see it's almost double, not even double, it's quadrupled, right? And in the past year, it represents a 650% year on year increase, right? So there are quite a few names I can pick up, right? One was the SolarWinds, and then Lawrence spoke about the Log4j. There's so many such instances where we've seen people have become victims, right? Organizations have become victims because software is cutting across various organizations, industries. So, Azad, why is this becoming an issue? What is causing this year on year increase for these attacks? Azad?
Very good morning to the audience and Sujit. Thanks for giving very good statistics on the software side security backhaul, and especially how it's become vulnerable for the organization, for especially for the software security. So uh, every times we are seeing the increase in the software level of attack. So it may be there is lots of reason for this type of vulnerability increasing and lots that type of attack increasing. Something everybody you all rightly mentioned that we developer like to use ready-made code, what they got from the internet, what from other different source. They are used to become all these thing and they readily use and but there is lack of testing on that code, especially they, from the security point of view, what the exactly could do. And you know that often lots of could have many backdoor. It may have lots of bug. Developer other party may be inside the foreign part, like maybe something malware inside the code. So all this become very dangerous for the new application, and it's really increase the attack vector in the software security. So at 2020, we all hear about the solar blast attack, supply chain attack. It's come malicious software inside another solution. So it then spread to the across the network, and after certain time it burst and attack other things. So even we in different industry we also uh, experience the same thing. Like some organization may use one software from some uh, vendor or it was developed by some freelancer, but after certain time we found that it has some bug and it may have some lots of major problem inside the software, and that due to the problem or due to this bug, due to this error, it become affected and become attack. So this is happening lots of ways. So to be aware of this thing, we should have very good testing, especially software source code review, and some sorts of assurance in such that every source code what we are using, what we got from the third party should be reviewed very meticulously in terms of security. and definitely it should be tested in terms of functionality also.
Azad, thank you for those thoughts, right? So there are various reasons you cited for this increase.
Can I
Raja?
add something to that,
Yeah,
Sujit, if you
sure,
don't mind?
sure, Lawrence. Go ahead and add. Yes.
Yeah, I think the other reason is if you look sort of back 5 years ago, uh, the life of a developer was quite simple. They didn't use many external dependencies, let's say building applications. It was pretty self-contained, and they deployed maybe into their own data center, right? But you fast forward to today, there's a lot of choice for developers. There's so many different open source projects and third-party libraries they can use. I think developers are overwhelmed with the amount of stuff they can use. So Sneak actually published a paper last week, actually, the state of open source software. I'll put the link into the chat window, but basically it articulates that most applications being built today, 90% of the actual code that ends up running in production is open source libraries that they bring in. I mean, it kind of makes sense, right? You wouldn't have developers rebuild or reinvent the wheel when building applications. There's certain functions when you build standard web applications and mobile applications that you can reuse, right? It doesn't make sense for developers to go off and build their own thing. They can just download an open source library, which is great, and it speeds up development. Obviously, there's inherent risk in doing that, and people need to understand it and sort of weigh up that risk. For example, in that report that I shared, it said that the average number of what we call direct dependencies in an application is about 79, right? So every application incorporates 79 libraries they need to build the application. But the problem is those 79 open source libraries that you include in your application have other interdependencies. So we call them transient dependencies. So that is where most of these vulnerabilities lie within the software supply chain. And you need to have tools that actually check the full dependency graph of applications. I would like to highlight that because I think there's a lot of complexity in sort of dealing with all those dependencies that you use for applications.
Absolutely, Lawrence. I mean,
Can I-
just picking on two things, right? Raja,
Yeah.
do you want to comment? Then I'll.
So adding to that, Lawrence and Azad
Yeah.
point, right? I would like to highlight that. So the open source adoptions into the every industries, it started exponentially increase next year. So the main things from my perspective, right? So there are developers and as well as like the DevOps guys, they need to make sure one is cultural perspective and another thing is in the tools. They need to make sure there are two aspects they need to consider. One is vulnerabilities and another one is threats perspective, right? So when they try to build the libraries with the dependencies, they need to make sure that vulnerable free libraries are built into that. So and making sure that when you are going into the runtime environment, making sure that all the companies and industries should adopt the SBOM, software bill of materials, right? So the same versions and set of codes and the libraries are deployed into the productions, which places under continuous delivery and making sure that so that's it is directions. When we talk about threads, the direction is a journey. They need to just continuously assess the threads and making sure that deploying and patching continuously. And as of today, all the industries microservices are increasing, and in their application adoption they can redeploy the instances anytime, so like because of the frictionless environment. That's what I would like to add.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, the few points I'd like to highlight, right? So, you're talking about a journey where the threat detection, it cannot be one-off, so it has to be continuous, right? So, when we talk about a continuous journey, it's not going to stop in the development environment. It has to progress to the UAT and then also to the production. So continuously you've got to evolve, continue to detect the new vulnerabilities which may arise. And Lawrence also highlighted two important statistics in their the white paper which has been published. 90% of the code, whatever is in production, is based on open source library. And the other important thing he also says is that 79% of the libraries are dependent. So when you're looking at a standalone code, it may be working fine. There may not be any vulnerabilities, but when you try to put them together, it might give a new risk. So Raja, giving this context, right, I just want to quickly ask you, uh, today we are seeing, I again read a research which Frost and Sullivan had done recently, where they're saying 50% of organizations in APAC have already got their workloads in the cloud, right? So more than 50%.
Yeah.
So some of them could be lifting and shifting it, but some of them probably are building cloud native applications. So we are talking about modernization of the application. So what would be a few things you would highlight for the people who are in this session so that they can take it and practice it in their environment? What are those tips you would like to give them when they have to modernize an application and migrate it to the cloud?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Although you mentioned many organizations already adopted, and rest of the organization really trying to adopt the cloud-ready application. So, what we actually faced to developing or delivering cloud-ready application, lots of challenge for especially for legacy application. Uh, it's really cannot migrate. So, and readily cannot migrate, but for migrating that we have to rethink to migration, like we have to crash the application, we have to build the application from the crash. So one idea could be very good to develop microservice based application. So if we can segment the application into different microservice and transfer to cloud ready, that can be the good option for making the application cloud ready. One more thing we have to always remember while we migrating into the app cloud, that should be interoperable, or it should be some sorts of use common technology such that in case if they want to migrate from one cloud to another cloud, then they can migrate easily. And obviously all the application what we migrating, we have to think about the access of this application and the user of the application. How many application in especially in the financial sector used by the customer, they may not have the proper internet activity, may not have network connectivity in the remote area, but that part we cannot readily migrate to the cloud because of accessibility issue, but that have to be, that should be kept on premises or in any other format. But while we migrating, we have to think about the network connectivity such that, and we have to think as a microservice. And especially one thing we have to very strictly consider, like using of API. So in on infrastructure, if we have many service, if you can use API very effectively, then our development cost will really reduce. Instead of developing all the components separately, better we can call the API all this thing. And
Yeah.
so
I
this
just
all.
got to pause you here. I just want to go across to Raja. Raja, what are you seeing in terms of the trends for modernization and migration of cloud in APAC region?
Yeah.
What's
So
the
so modernization definitely, it is increasing exponentially. So like in terms of like a new in APAC, there are a lot of new startups like fintech companies, and in terms of e-commerce payments and digital banking related, right? So I see there are two aspects, right? So one is existing applications migration. The key factors when you are intent to migrate existing application into the cloud, you need to be first and the foremost of phase. You need to discover it. Okay, discovery in the sense there are two type of discovery. One is automated discovery, and another one is manual discovery. So, like automated discovery, you need to rely on the tools and techniques, so that you need to making sure that all the discovery, the application dependencies in terms of library, how it is communicating from one component to another component, so that it will be easy to detect. The next thing is manual discovery. So even though like a lot of tools and techniques available in the market, but you need to rely on the people. So like people dependency is huge when you talk about the applications, any industries or any companies. So once you have to be keep that technical discovery as a baseline, you need to talk to the people, and interviewing, you need to use that interviewing techniques and discover and all the like the dependencies and everything. So you will have that like make a checker process to making sure that before migrating into the cloud. So like that's modernizing your application, that is the first step. And another thing is like when you are application newly built, and another thing is right, so when you are building into the cloud, so you need to have that a lot of aspects, like for example, one thing is like you need to look at the day zero and as well as day one. So you need to have that when you are day zero design thinking workshop, how your applications are resilient and react in the failure scenarios, and all the aspects which you need to consider about it, and how it is like a region dependencies and the data related. And obviously the third one is DevOps principles, like how you are adapting that like the continuous integrations and the delivery, right? And making sure that when you are deploying your applications into the cloud, and making sure that it is a cloud ready, all the 12 factor principles is followed, no frictionless, and the legacy testing is not followed. All the things, everything's modern approaches is you are included in when you are modernizing your applications. That's what I can provide.
Great thoughts. And Azad, both of you, right? You give some wonderful points which people can probably adopt. Lawrence, you got to give me this, the view of all what both Azad and Raja mentioned. Few points I want you to touch on, right? Raja spoke on discovery, right? Discovery of the apps, the libraries, automated or manual. Then he also spoke about the maker checker. The third one, he also spoke about design thinking. He also spoke about DevOps. And he is also talking about a modern approach. Now, when you look at people, process, technology, and in real life, to implement all these things, it's not going to be easy, isn't it? So I would like to understand from your experience and from what you're seeing, how should an organization establish a good, successful DevSecOps culture? Right. So that's combining development, security, process, procedures, everything. What are your views, Lawrence?
Yeah, sure. I would say, obviously, if the organization has already implemented DevOps, then there's a solid foundation for incorporating security into those processes, right? So that's the first thing I'd say. Second thing is, probably the most important thing, is empathy, the word empathy. The reason why I say that is there's long been a struggle, I guess, between the security and development teams. They don't understand each other's point of view, right? So if you break down those walls and have empathy for each side, it's going to be easier to collaborate. Now, the way that sort of gets implemented in organizations is slightly different depending on the structure, but what I've seen work fairly well is having that product security mindset treating security as a first-class citizen, actually intentionally doing threat modeling and having security testing as part of the backlog of the product, just like you would have features in a product, and the product manager or the security owner, if you will, is sort of going through that backlog, making sure developers are sort of taking those security features, if you will, into the product, just like they would any other feature, right? So in a sense, security naturally becomes part of every project that they start. Now, that's not easy to do, right? Mainly because developers don't have security knowledge. But the way you can get around that is have application security teams that are the sort of layer between security and development, where most of the team may have come from engineering, so they understand the engineering mindset, so they have empathy for the engineering, and they've got some experience in security, or it might be the other way, actually. Traditional security analysts move into this AppSec space who have an interest in programming. Either way, that empathy is important because you need to understand how each side works and how you can work effectively. And a big part of this is the word trust as well, right? At some point, you need to trust developers to actually own parts of security, even though they may not be fully educated on it at the start. But in order to go fast, you need to trust them to actually, or maybe a better word is empower them to remediate fixes on their own. So if developers can be sort of self-sufficient, that's how you're going to actually scale and have a good culture. Now, obviously, good tooling is going to help them get there by doing a lot of that heavy lifting and providing fixes automatically for them, so they don't have to actually go hunting through the code and work out, which lines of code need to change and which libraries I need to upgrade to what version and which configuration files I need to change. If all of that is sort of surfaced to the developer, basically on a silver platter, then they don't need to have that much security context really, because the fix is right there in front of them. They can just sort of accept or reject. Now, having said that, it's often good practice to have some engineers that have deep security knowledge. You may have heard of the term security champions program, where a bunch of engineers, software engineers that is, within the organization form a committee or a community and sort of meet regularly. And it would be ideal to have one of these champions per project, and their role is to enable other engineers on security best practices. So that's the way that you're going to sort of permeate security best practices across the organization. And the final point I would say is automation, right? The first few points I made was on the people and process, but equally important is automation and tooling. In order to implement some of these processes and collaborate well and work effectively, you need to have a system that's going to automate a lot of these sort of mundane security testing for you. And most obvious place for doing that is in CI/CD, automatically testing various aspects of your stack, whether that be the first-party proprietary code, whether that be any new open source libraries that are included, whether that be your infrastructure or cloud configurations, whether that be your containers. All these type of things should be continually tested automatically before any sort of deployment is done, right? So I could probably go on, but I think that's probably a good summary to help folks think about how to start having a good culture around security.
Lawrence, I'm going to stay with you for a little more time, right? I'm just going to summarize quickly what you said, and I have another, continuous, a related question with respect to whatever you just shared. So, in order to build a good culture or DevSecOps culture, two things which I would take with me and implement it back would be empathy and trust. Right?
Correct.
Then we will have to also look at the heavy lifting. How do we reduce that workload? So tooling comes into play. So when we look at the tooling and empathy trust, how do we establish the accountability part? Who will own? Who will make the decisions?
Yeah.
At the end of the day, while we'd like to trust everyone, but the golden rule in security is trust no one, right? And today the buzzword everywhere is zero trust. Right? So how do we, marry the responsibilities, accountabilities, and how do they keep people informed or consult? What are your thoughts? What is happening in your part of the world? What should the people hear in this session or will be listening into this recording? What should be their takeaway from you?
Yeah, good question. First thing I would say is, I think the role of a security analyst is changing, right? So previously, the security analyst is concerned with getting visibility across applications in cloud and getting a report basically of the known issues, right? But that doesn't help developers too much, right? Because they've got to take that report, actually go back into their code and figure out what to fix, okay? So instead, and the other role that the security played was sort of a gating function, more of a controlling function to say, you shall not pass this gate if your code has security issues. But in reality, we spoke about open source, right? If 90% of the code is open source, it's going to have vulnerabilities. It's a known fact, right?
Absolutely.
So you got to accept that vulnerabilities will end up in production. There's no way around it. Okay, and there's some sort of risk analysis assessment done, and hopefully the tooling can actually help you do this as well to prioritize the most critical issues first, based on different context, right? I can get into more of that in a minute, but essentially now, if you look at the role of a application AppSec engineer, right? They're focused on delivering a platform, delivering tools, delivering the guidelines and the guardrails for developers to operate within, right? So that instead of being that controlling function, stopping code getting deployed or what have you, now providing the runway for developers to go fast. So that's where the trust comes in. Once you've set up that infrastructure and those platforms, now developers can go fast within the context of that, right? Obviously, they can't go outside that context. They may be breaking some policies or what have you, but as long as they're within policy, within those guidelines, you should trust developers to own security for the components they build that pass through those pipelines.
Right. So AppSec engineers, right? So they have a significant role to play here, isn't it?
For sure.
So it's not just saying trust and empathy, but you also build that process which will enable that culture, isn't it, Lawrence?
100%, yeah.
So I'm just sorry.
Go ahead.
You were saying something?
I was just going to say, I'm agreeing with you, and also saying the main function for an AppSec engineer is to enable developers to go faster but stay secure.
Yeah. So while it's like having brakes in your vehicle, isn't it? So it allows you to drive fast, but you should be able to brake when the need arises.
Correct. Yeah.
So
it's a good analogy.
Thank you, Lawrence. For those insights, right? Raja, I'm just coming to you for this, right? Now we heard what Lawrence spoke about, the importance of having a DevSecOps culture and trust and empathy.
Yep.
Right. How are organizations adopting it? Right? What do you see the banking financial industry or the regulated industry? Are they doing all these things, or is it a long way out? How will they secure their code? Because some code they would probably, get it from external parties. Some you probably do it in-house. Now you have a mixed bag of applications.
So in terms of like a regulated industries, right? So like now, other than that, previously it's kind of like the transportations industries or banking industries. Now fintechs are coming into the pictures. So like what I can see here, right? So previously it is kind of paper based security, correct? So like manually verify the
Big part.
artifacts and just to take the artifact in the paper and just to validate it and sign it, right? So now all the automations and everything, right? It is paperless security, everything integrated in part of pipeline itself, right? So that is a main thing. So as Lawrence quoted it, like there are two aspects, right? One is like building the platform, so making sure that threats perspective, threat modeling perspective, and another aspects when we are application team trying to consume that particular services and going into the in terms of modernization or cloud or any point of things, so they will just making sure that compliance perspective, everything it's it is aligned with that. One is platform, making sure that all the compliance perspective, and another one is when they try to consume it, so they are making sure that everything is adapted. So that's why like they are adapting and aligned with that NIST or other regulatory industries and from various countries.
Sure. So paperless security,
Yep.
right? And moving away from the tick marks, right, or tick box
Yep.
security, right? I mean, that's what I have heard people say, right? I mean, have a checklist for everything and you tick it off and then say the security in place. Now, what I'm trying to visualize is when you go paperless, like with papers, we had so much of challenges ticking it off.
Yep.
Now, going paperless, how are we going to ensure this thing, right? So it requires a lot of confidence to be in the system. So, Azad, before I ask you the question, for those audience, right, if you have any questions, please post them. I'm not yet seeing any questions yet. So if you do have any questions for the panelists, please feel free to type them in the chat box so that we could answer those questions for you.
Yeah.
Azad,
Sujit,
right?
sorry,
Yeah,
before moving into the Azad, so I wanted to highlight, give example to the audience that when we talk about paperless, right? So today we are using GitHub is the open source tool. So like paperless in the sense how we are ensuring that removing secrets on the commit history, right? So that is a main thing. So like previously you need to like paper based security, you need to just to circle down and take the new printout. Now everything is commit history, all the pre-hook commits, everything. If you are accidentally injected the secrets, you can remove it actually. So
sure.
that is the detections and capability. So that's why we are bringing around actually.
Excellent, excellent, excellent for those thoughts. So GitHub is a good way to look at, right? So Azad, coming to you. Now, you heard Lawrence say that 90% of the code which goes into a product is open source, right? And then we are talking about culture, trust, empathy. We are talking about tooling. Now, there's something called an assured open source software. So, if you could briefly, tell the audience what is assured open source software as a service and how they could actually benefit from this. Okay?
Yeah, that concept really helpful for the audience and especially for the developer, because we are using lots of open source software. So this software we don't know why, how security is, how it is works. So the open source assurance is something, the concept, and nowadays it's really very much reality, that it is assured by some renowned organization. Means there will be some organization who will review the security of that open source component, and they will publish the result. Based on this result, people, while purchasing, while using or acquiring some open source solution on open source code, they, if they can review the assurance, who has given the assurance of this software, who has, what is the point for in terms of security, how is the rating in terms of effectiveness of the code, will be very helpful for the user for their assurance. Means Like yesterday, I was found lots of open source assurance solution means organization. Like especially like to mention the Google, they also provide the open source software assurance. Like they review the code, all the code uh, from the developer. When developer submit this code, they review and give the feedback. And if user use any open source assured software, then that will be more effective for his organization and along with his software in terms of security and effectiveness.
Right, right. Thank you for those thoughts. Right. So assurance. There is some form of way of getting the assurance. I'm going to stay with you, right? And I think we're about 9 minutes to end the session. So very briefly, if you can tell me, right, before I can go and get the final thoughts from Raja and Lawrence, uh, do you have a thought, I mean, any idea in terms of what the team structure should be for development environment? Because we heard from Lawrence talking about, the importance of having AppSec team
Right.
members, right? So
Right.
is there anything else you want to add to what Lawrence said?
Yeah, right. But team member, we can define any number, but every organization cannot afford that number. But what ideally a team should have at least developer, they should have someone who has expert or at least good understanding about the security, application security, source code, all these things, and someone at least good background of the testing, and definitely one from the business background who do the business requirement analysis. But then if we think the structure, at least it will come into 5 or 6 member, a small team for development. But what will happen for the small organization or individual person who himself want to develop? We always know that if the board means these are the domain knowledge or all this, but if single person, my opinion is that if a single person can have all this domain knowledge, he himself can be a team also. He can, one himself can be a one man army, like that he will implement security thing, he will consider security related thing, he will have software development knowledge, he will do the testing also. But ideally for a human, we know all that as for a single human it is really impossible to get all the knowledge domain expert. But from my point of view, in a team, one security professional, development towards based on the project and testing, and one business guy should be present in that team. And security should be built from the beginning of the software development and from the business stuff, and it should be embedded into the systems.
Process. All
Then
right. Okay, thank you, Azad, for those thoughts. So you need to look at the combination based on the requirement. Raja, I'm just going to come to you for these thoughts, and then I will move for the final
Sure,
thoughts from Lawrence. Right. So we got about 7 minutes to go. So if you
sure,
can
sure.
keep your responses brief, will be nice. You come from a very heavily regulated environment, right?
Yeah,
Both as an organization and also the environment you in, right? Very tightly regulated. And there's a increased dependency on third party suppliers.
yeah,
And Lawrence also made a very important observation in his presentation. Today, everything is about code, right? You talk about network, it is a code. You talk about an appliance, it is about a code. So everything is code. And we all know that the codes have vulnerabilities, right? And it is only increased. Like the attack, the statistics which we have shows that the attacks have been exponentially growing. So, your thoughts, what should people do to minimize the risk when they actually deal with third parties?
yeah, sure.
Some of the best practices you could.
Yeah. So in terms of secure the code, I understand that, right? So like in terms of what I can say is, so one is I was saying that SBOM, software bill of material. So when you are deploying the applications, right? So like what are the softwares and everything, right? And another thing is code. So I think increasingly, like all the regulators, they wanted to more focus on the securing the code, right? How you are securing the codes. I think all big four companies already doing it in terms of heavily like top companies, and when we talk about like regulated industries, I advise. So that's what I can do. I can say that they have to do the secure their code, okay, and making sure that properly encrypted, the code itself. So first phase, their libraries, everything vulnerable free, and minimize the attack surface and attack vectors. And finally, they have to, when they are deploying into the production, they need to do the code signing capability, deploy the code with the code signing capability. That's what I can add it to the point.
Sure. So two things I picked up, right? Secure web code and minimize the attack surface, right? Lawrence, you heard what both Azad and Rajab talked about, right? They're all, things, right? We are talking about minimizing attack surface, securing the code. Do you have anything which we can say, okay, here is a framework, or this is how we should approach to address the threats or the vulnerabilities in the land space? Like, because at some point in time, we need to reduce the vulnerabilities. How do we do it?
Yeah, I just want to extend what Raja said actually first. Yes, obviously you need to think about the code and dependencies, but I think it's more than that, right? If you look at like the SolarWinds attack, right? They got in through a build server, were able to inject malicious code into the packaging process, the build process, before it was distributed to end customers, right? And went unnoticed for several months. So I think increasingly organizations have to think about their full SDLC and all the infrastructure that supports it, right? You can have the best security in the world on the edge in the cloud, right? Endpoint protection, anomaly detection, antivirus, all that stuff, right? You can be totally secure. But if you have a weak link somewhere upstream in your software development process, in the case of SolarWinds, I think someone posted the username and password for a development build system into GitHub, right? Which is pretty common, right? People post AWS credentials and stuff into GitHub all the time. And that was a weak component, if you will, that allowed the attacker to get in, go undetected, and distribute malware, right? Same thing with like source control. People can get into your GitHub repositories and add code into various places for then to be distributed. In most cases, in a supply chain attack, they're not actually trying to attack the vendor. Like in the SolarWinds case, they weren't trying to bring down SolarWinds. They were trying to go after US federal government agencies that happen to use that software, right? So that's really sort of the power of these cascading attacks, if you will, in the supply chain. I'll give you a good example. Apart from SolarWinds, another one that was in the media was called CodeCov, which is a code coverage platform. Millions of developers use it to run test coverage as part of their CI/CD pipelines to see if they're actually testing every line of code. Used by big companies like Spotify, Confluent, Twilio, those ones. And here they were able to get into an S3 bucket and change the a batch script, just one line of batch script, to export all of their customers' internal server information, because the way that people use the product is in their CI/CD, and CI/CD is basically the crown jewels of your environment, right? It has all the credentials to connect the various internal systems and external systems for deployment and building your software, right? So if you can get in there, you've basically got access to everything, right? So just by putting one line in the batch script, they were able to export all this internal secrets and IP addresses and credentials to another server, and went undetected for some time. And then hackers were obviously able to get into CodeCov's end customers' environments, right, causing some damage. So you need to think about not just the apps and the code, but all the infrastructure that you have, most probably in the cloud as well, that supports the SDLC and building of those apps, if that makes sense.
It does, Lawrence. I mean, it is important for us. It's not just look at the code per se. We need to also understand what happens upstream and what happens downstream. So we need to look at that whole 100 yards and have a framework to address every single piece.
Oh, you mentioned framework. So Raja has mentioned SBOM a couple of times. That's obviously a new sort of emerging standard. There's a couple of standards coming out like Cyclone DB from the OWASP Foundation, and SPDX is standards for exporting basically the ingredients or the components that are inside your application, and you can share that via an API with third parties, and they can do the same, right? So that's not going to remove malicious code and attacks, but it's going to at least give you visibility around what components are actually running in your software, right?
Absolutely.
And then,
and I think more importantly, it gives that visibility and a structured approach, doesn't it? The frameworks would help you achieve that. Yeah. Go ahead, Lawrence, you were saying something.
On top of that as well, I would look at what the CNCF is doing. The Cloud Native Computing Foundation have released a best practices guide around software supply chain. They talk about things like containers, infrastructure as code, pipeline security, obviously code and open source. But there's a whole bunch of best practices in there that you can apply into your organization to help start thinking about securing the software supply chain. And then I would look at the NIST as well, which is the National Institute of Standards and Technology out of the US, but I think it's applicable for this region as well. They've released a resource cybersecurity supply chain risk management paper, which is another good resource to look at as well.
Thank you, Lawrence. I mean, I think there are plenty of resources out there, and some of the frameworks which you mentioned are probably good to look at, so that you can minimize your attack surface or the vulnerabilities which probably get introduced. More importantly, what I would like to highlight is that you need to monitor the whole process, right? Continuously monitor from the start to the end, and the journey doesn't end until you remove and decommission that piece of code or the application from the environment. So we are absolutely run out of time, gentlemen. It was an absolute pleasure for me to host you for this panel discussion. I learned a few things which I probably will take with me and probably use it in my engagement in my organization or when I have my conversations with my peers. Right. So those of you who have any questions, you can always reach out to the panelists. You can find them in the LinkedIn, or you can even reach out to Bede. He'll be able to direct all your questions if you have any, or anything which you need in terms of assistance or consulting engagement. You can always reach out to Sneak. Thank you so much and have a great day.
Thanks everyone.
Thanks, folks. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Sujit. Thank you, Raja and Lawrence.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Bede.
Thanks everyone for that very highly informative panel discussion. And of course, it was very great having you moderate this session. We're always great to have you here at our events. And of course, thanks to our esteemed set of panelists, Raja, Azad, and of course, Lawrence from Snake, who, as I mentioned, are our partners for this panel discussion and this event as a whole. I'm sure there were those of you who were listening in before this panel discussion also tuned into this presentation right before. We're very glad to have had all of you here today. And as Sujit mentioned, should you have any questions for any of them, do feel free to reach out, connect with them on LinkedIn. You can drop the questions there as well. And of course, do feel free to message them here on the platform. I assume they might be also in to watch the other sessions that are taking place today. And do take the time to visit the Snake booth, of course, to learn more about what Lawrence was discussing earlier on in his presentation. And of course, more on this panel discussion as well. And to all those who are just joining as well, I do want to invite you to join the Slack community. So there you can watch the previous sessions if you had missed it. All the recording links are posted on there. And you can also find that through the receptions page of this platform. You may get updates during the event and stay connected with all those who are involved in making this event happen. So with that, I do want to thank all the speakers once again. So thank you once for moderating session. Thanks, Raja, Azad, and Lawrence. We're very good to have you here today. And with that, I'll be closing this session now. So hope you all have a wonderful day ahead.
Thank you.
You
Thank
too, Bede. Have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you.